morning. This is Anna, and I am Youth Services Librarian at Little Boston for Kitsap Regional Library. We are going to be doing our Readers Theater this afternoon, which is a little bit of pop-up reading. And today we have a special guest. Our book that we are going to take a look at is The BFG. For most of you, you know The Big Friendly Giant by Roald Dahl. And our guest here, Ned, is Roald Dahl's grandson. So we're very happy to have him here and get some behind the scenes look at the BFG, ask him a couple of questions, and then do a little bit of reading that might get you excited about reading the BFG for the first time, or reading it again if you have it and you have loved it. So first question for Ned, how are you?
I'm very well, Anna. Thank you very much for asking.
And we are recording this today instead of doing live because Ned, of course, lives in London near his family, and he is stuck there for the moment, just like we are in our homes because of COVID. So we wanted to ask Ned a couple of questions and about the BFG. But first, I just wanted to ask, do you have a favorite or special memory about your grandfather that you would like to share with us?
Well, I think I've said before, my grandfather very sadly passed away before I was born. But the great thing about him is that because he wrote all these fantastic stories and all these, marvelous books, as well as both my family's memory of him, like most people who have from their grandparents, I also have all of these books to read, all of his audiobooks to listen to, and more importantly, and the best part of it, is I get to hear everyone else tell me how much they loved reading or how much they loved his stories. And that's what really helps me, get to grips with him, understand him, and really like the books, like I hope a lot of your kids have done.
Nice. Do you have a favorite book or story that he wrote?
I have a favorite book. It is called The Giraffe, the Pelly, and the Me. And it is about a boy who works for a window washing company. And the window washing company has a giraffe, which they use to get to the windows. And it has a pelican with its huge beak, which they use to carry the water to the windows. And a monkey who goes around washing all the windows. And it's a great story about a huge window job and a big robbery and the police. And it's very exciting. It's definitely my favorite.
Wow, I have never read that one. I'm going to have to find it and take a look because now I'm excited to read it. I like your description, and it sounds really fun. Let's see, another quick question. I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but the Big Friendly Giant was first mentioned in a short story called Danny the Champion of the World. Tell us a little bit, if you know, about the BFG and how he came to have his own story.
Sure. So Danny, the Champion of the World, is another fantastic one of the books. And it's about a boy and his father and their life in the countryside. And a lot of it is about the stories that the dad tells his kids, his son. And it is similar to how the BFG came to life in the real world, where my mother and her friends and her sisters, when they would go to bed, my grandfather would read them stories. And a lot of the stories he wrote and he published started or were sort of tested on my mum and her sisters and her friends. And the BFG was one of the biggest ones. And he would tell them the story of the BFG, and then he would go to bed and he'd say, "Go to sleep, girls." And then when they were asleep, the window would open and a trumpet would come through the window. And this is the BFG's dream trumpet, which he would blow dreams into the minds of children, which is in the book. And my grandfather would do it to his kids. And he would never mention it the next day. So he would try and encourage them to think about the BFG. And at home, we still have these big jars, big glass jars, which are the BFG's dream jars, and it's where the dreams are kept. And we still have them in my sister's house in the garden, and they're beautiful, and they're colored in green, and it's where all the dreams that get blown into kids' kids' heads come from.
Oh, how beautiful and magical. That's
Mm.
a really special.
Mm.
I like thinking about that in the jars. Now it
Mm.
makes me want to collect some to have in my house too. It's a nice
Put up a
dream
dream.
catcher idea.
Exactly. Put up a dream catcher and you can
Yeah.
get some more.
Let's see. I had another quick question as I was reading and thinking about all the unusual words and names that are used in the BFG, like flesh lump eater, maid masher, blotter. Some of those
Snozzcumber.
are good tongue twisters. Uh, were those names like, did your grandfather use funny names for people, or where did he come up with some of his most interesting words?
My grandfather Rod, he loved, we call in the family he's called Moldy because his name is Roald, and my sister Sophie couldn't pronounce Roald, so she would call him as a child Mold, and so for the rest of the family they always call him Moldy. He was obsessed with inventing words. There's a dictionary that was published of all the words he invented, and they don't make any sense, but that's because it's fun to make up words. It's fun to make up sounds and silly words and things because you don't need to know what they mean because you can work it out. You can imagine it, or you can sort of make it mean whatever you want. And so he'd always have funny names for people, funny names for things, invented names for giants or vegetables. You know the word snozzcumber, which is this thing that the BFG eats. And you don't even have to know what a snozzcumber is, even though it doesn't exist, because you know it sounds horrible, because it's something even worse than a cucumber. And that originally is pretty awful. So
it is. Yeah, I think just even starting with the word snoz brings about some interesting descriptions in your head.
Absolutely.
I think one of my other favorite things about the books are, of course, the illustrations. And I'm going to see if I can bring up, if I share my screen, just a nice picture that includes many of the illustrations that were done by Mr. Blake, I believe. And
he's now being made a knight by the Queen, so he's now Sir Quentin Blake.
Sir Quentin Blake. And there's a print with lots of his illustrations from some of the favorite characters. And I love his style of drawing. I think very much like Roald's, very expressive words and language. The illustrations really define some of those pictures that we already have in our heads. Do you have a favorite illustration?
I like the roly-poly bird, which you can see on the screen. It's the bird with all those amazing feathers on the left of the screen. I actually have a, if you stay here, just one moment, I have something very, very funny. I like the roly-poly bird so much that I have a roly-poly bird.
Oh, nice!
Which I have in the house. And it's it's my favorite animal that my grandfather invented, because obviously the roly-poly bird doesn't exist. But he is a fun character, regardless. Put him over there for now. And I love Quentin Blake's drawings, Quentin's drawings, and he got on very well with my grandfather. But the BFG, funnily enough, is based on a real person. There was a man who worked for my grandfather called Wally, who had been a soldier, and then he went to work for my grandfather and built things in his garden and built sheds and swimming pools and things like that. And he was very, very, very tall, very, very, very skinny, and had huge ears. And I remember Wally. He was alive when I was young, and he would have these huge ears and quite red. And he would play snooker all day and talk to you about stories. And he always had a very funny voice, and he got words wrong sometimes. And I think the BFG is directly inspired by Wally. But the
Did he
clothes
wear
the
sandals
BFG,
like the BFG?
well, I was about to say the clothes the BFG wears are from Norway, which is where
Okay.
my grandfather was from. So the sandals are traditional Norwegian sandals, and the clothes I think just some normal countryside clothes. But Wally is the BFG, and I think it's always funny seeing someone so immortalized and knowing that it's Wally who built the sort of office and things like that. And it's a really nice way to remember, I think, one of my grandfather's probably best friends. And they would play snooker every day. And I think he was a big friendly giant, I suppose.
Nice. That's a wonderful memory to have.
Mm.
So I guess this would be a chance to do a little bit of reading. I'm going to just do an introduction of the BFG from the first couple of pages, and then as part of our Reader's Theater, we will have Ned just read the first chapter of the BFG and give you a little taste of what it sounds like. So the BFG is no ordinary bone-crunching giant. He is far too nice and jumbly, and it's lucky for Sophie that he is. Had she been snitched from her bed by flesh lump eater, bone cruncher, child chewer, gizzard gulper, or any of the other giants, she wouldn't have stood a chance, but would have been guzzled like a whiff's whittle before you could say Rack Jobinson. Whisked off to Giant Land, Sophie is shocked and horrified by the BFG's repulsive neighbors. When she hears that they are flush bunking off to England that very night to swallump a few nice little English chidlers, she decides she must put a stop to them at once. This is a wildly funny, wickedly inventive, golden fizz wizard of a book and will be enjoyed by children of all ages. With some interesting words and language there for us.
Yeah, but you don't need to know what they mean.
You don't. You can imagine that they are the most horrible giants through their horrible names and just some very interesting shenanigans that they'll be up to when they get to England to go and find these little children.
The BFG, like a lot of the stories, is based on old tales from Norway. So these are old sort of, you would tell stories about giants or creatures from the night and things like that. They're folk tales from the often the indigenous communities and then the Norse communities of Norway.
I would love to hear you read a little bit of the BFG.
I'd love to. So I am reading the first chapter, which is The Witching Hour. Sophie couldn't sleep. A brilliant moonbeam was slanting through a gap in the curtains, and it was shining right onto her pillow. The other children in the dormitory had been asleep for hours, but Sophie closed her eyes and lay quite still. She tried very hard to doze off, but it was no good. The moonbeam was like a silver blade slicing through the room onto her face. The house was absolutely silent. No voices came up from downstairs. There were no footsteps on the floor above either. But the window behind the curtain was wide open, and nobody was walking on the pavement outside. No cars went by on the street, not the tiniest sound could be heard anywhere. And Sophie had never known such a silence. Perhaps, she told herself, this is what they call the witching hour. The witching hour, someone had once whispered to her, was a special moment in the middle of the night when every child and every grown-up was in a deep, deep sleep, and all the dark things came out from hiding and had the world to themselves. The moonbeam was brighter than ever on Sophie's pillow, and she decided to get out of bed and to close the gap in the curtains. You got punished if you were caught out of bed after lights out, even if you said you had to go to the lavatory. That was not accepted as an excuse, and they punished you just the same. But there was no one about now. Sophie was sure of that. She reached out for her glasses that lay on the chair by her bed. They had steel rims and very thick lenses. She could hardly see a thing without them. She put them on, she slipped out of bed and tiptoed over to the window. When she reached the curtain, Sophie hesitated. She longed to duck underneath them and lean out the window to see what the world looked like now that the witching hour was at hand. She listened again. Everything there was deathly still. The longing to look out became so strong she couldn't resist it, and quickly she ducked under the curtains and leaned out of the window. In the silvery moonlight, the village street she knew so well seemed completely different. The houses looked bent and crooked, like houses in a fairy tale, and everything was pale and ghostly and milky white. And across the road, she could see Mrs. Rance's shop, where you bought buttons and wool and bits of elastic. It didn't look real. There was something dim and misty about that too. And then Sophie allowed her eye to travel further and further down the street, and suddenly she froze. There was something coming up on the streets to the opposite side. It was something black, something tall and black, something very tall, very black, and very thin.
Awesome.
Find out more in chapter 2.
Thank you very much, Ned,
Of
for your reading of the BFG and a little behind the scenes and some thoughts about your grandfather and some of his books and the art in the books. Really appreciate having you all the way here in Washington from London. And
if there's any bonus of the COVID-19 quarantine, it's that I can sit here and read to a group of students in Washington State. I think that's marvelous. I think that's a great benefit of being stuck at home.
It is. It is. I am glad we were able to find you. Normally you're around the world doing various things and traveling. So I'm happy that we were able to catch you also.
Absolutely.
And hopefully we can do it again sometime. Thank you so
Definitely.
much. It was great to see
All right.
you. Bye.
Bye.